So look, I understand. We have to get by in the world, right? I mean, we need food to eat. We have to look after our family. Nobody's denying that. The question is there anything else beyond merely getting by in the world? And not only that, but what is the source of our suffering? Where do our problems come from? Now, these are the questions that were addressed by the sages of the past, and this is the primary thrust of the teachings of the Buddha Dharma. The Buddha was somebody who was really well off. I mean, he was born a prince in a very rich family, and he was heir to an entire kingdom. And so he enjoyed a life of opulence, luxury. He could have anything he wanted. I mean, he's sort of like these tech giants we get these days in Silicon Valley. Elon Musk, these sort of people. They can basically have whatever they want. The problem with having whatever you want is you become distracted. You become spoiled, basically. You no longer have to work for things. And you surround yourself with yes men, people who just agree with you. So the Buddha had all these things, right? He had many girlfriends. He had games, distractions, enjoyments. And more than that, then his father intentionally distracted him. Because when the Buddha was born, there was a prophecy made. And the prophecy was that the Buddha would either become a universal monarch, so that's somebody who has power over an entire solar system or universe, or he would become a sage and achieve awakening. And so the Buddha's father didn't want him to become a sage, obviously, because if he became a sage, he would give up his princely inheritance and his kingdom and go forth, become a beggar. And not only that, but his father was looking forward to his heir, his son, becoming the king of the entire world. The power, the fame, the prestige, the wealth, all of this encouraged the Buddha's father to deceive him. And what he did was, then he locked him in a palace and made sure that he never encountered suffering. But as we know, this is impossible, right? Even the richest man in the world has suffering. From what I understand, then, Elon Musk suffers from depression. It just goes to show. You can be the richest man in the world, but you're still going to have to experience suffering, and especially these primary forms of suffering. And that's aging, sickness, and death. This is something we're all subject to. And you can be the king of the world, but when your time comes, you have to pass from this life, and when you pass from this life, you can't even take with you a single stitch of clothing. Not even your most loyal servant or helper. Nothing. You go alone. You go naked. You can't take anything with you. And even if your fame remains in the world for centuries, it's of no use to you. You're finished. Now, fortunately for us, then the Buddha, on a few occasions, then encountered the suffering of the human realm. It was almost by accident. He saw someone who was sick, someone who was elderly, very old, and also a corpse. And because the Buddha had the sharpest of intellects, then upon seeing these sights, upon witnessing human suffering, the Buddha, through extrapolation, came to this unavoidable conclusion, and that is that no matter what temporary happiness you experience, then eventually you will succumb to death, mortality. This is a question that faces us all. And so, having become aware of this truth of suffering, then naturally the Buddha sought a solution. The Buddha realized that his wealth, his opulence, the food, the luxury, none of this mattered, because eventually he too would die. And so what the Buddha sought out was a remedy to suffering, what we call the state of deathlessness. And that's what's known as awakening or liberation. But in the meantime, we've got to live, right? I mean, the monks in the time of the Buddha, then they went begging for their food. And they did that so they didn't have to involve themselves in the normal, unvirtuous negativities that were necessary in order to survive. And some people in the West see this to be kind of a really negative thing. For example, to get a layperson to slaughter an animal so that you could eat, so that you could avoid that negative karma. It's seen in a bad light by Westerners. But it's not the way that it was perceived by people at that time. Because essentially, going forth, that means abandoning the world, is not an easy thing to do. It's really difficult. Just because you wear the robes of a monk doesn't make it any easier. Because what you're doing is you're giving up on the world, on the mundane world. You're giving up on any hope of achieving lasting happiness. Well, that's not an easy thing to do. We are addicted to samsara. We are addicted to the mundane world. But if you seek transcendence, if you seek awakening, then you just have to do your best. And of course, it's not going to be easy just to abandon everything, give everything up. I mean, this is very liberating. Being able to give up on your stuff is very liberating. In fact, we are tethered by our wealth, our possessions. They limit us greatly in what we can achieve. And somebody who has no attachments in this world is truly free. But that's not easy. So we have to make compromises, right? Even the monks and nuns in the monasteries make compromises. And to be quite honest, we're not able to live the way that the mendicants lived in the past, in the time of the Buddha. It's very rare to find someone who is able to keep their vows really purely. But one has to do one's best. And you have to decide what you're aiming for. If you've decided that you're fed up with the suffering in the world, and that you need to find a solution, you need to find a way out, not only for yourself, but to solve this problem, the problem of the world, and how our experiences of well-being make us complicit in the suffering of others. So anyway, that's just something I wanted you to think about. So the conclusion is, well, you don't be too hard on yourself. You just have to do what you can. But you also have to think about things well. And you have to decide. One has to decide for oneself. Is it worth it? Is the suffering that I experience and the pain I inflict on others, is it worth it for the short-term happiness I have? And if your answer is no, if you come to the conclusion that it's not worth it, then you've got to find a way out of this situation. If you believe there is a way out of this situation, I mean, maybe you don't believe there is a way out of this situation. But if you believe in what the Buddha taught, then there is. And that's what we call the Eightfold Noble Path, or the path to liberation. So I just thought I'd leave you with those thoughts. And then until next time, see you later.